Thank you, listeners, for joining us for Elko Live today, our weekday radio show with community news. And, of course, this being the election season, we are very excited to bring together two important guests to help us understand the ballot questions. Now, hopefully, many of you have already seen your sample ballot. You got it in the mail, likely over the weekend, leading up to the general election on Tuesday, November 5th. We'll talk about and remind you about early voting, of course, but today's guests are going to help us, and we're just going to have a conversation. It's not a debate. We have Lee Hoffman in studio. He chairs the Elko County Republican Party. And Lee, it's great to have you back. Welcome to the radio show.
Thank you, Lori. Thanks for having us today.
And alongside Lance Whitney, and Lance is chair of the Elko Democrat Party here in Elko. And Lance, it's great to welcome you to the studio. You have moved back to the community after some time.
I have, Lori, and thanks so much for having me, and thanks to Elko Broadcasting and my fellow colleague Lee.
Well, it's great to have you gentlemen side by side. Again, this is a conversation about these ballot questions, and it's a great opportunity to show how neighbors can have conversations. We all have spent considerable time here in Elko. In fact, I can start with you, Lance, if you like. Wouldn't you mind introducing yourself, and then we'll have Lee do the same.
Yeah, I'm Lance Whitney. I grew up here. Was chair of the Elko County Democratic Party in the 2000s until I moved away in 2007 to move to Carson City to run the Obama campaign for rural Nevada, and then moved up to Boise, where I became the state chair, essentially, for the Organizing for America, state director, rather. And then moved to Salt Lake, where I got involved in real estate and construction and so on, and then I got tired of the rat race, and I thought, I want something a little bit slower in my 40s. So I moved back home, and that's what brings me back.
Well, welcome home, Lance.
Thank
again,
you.
It's great. Thank you again for being here today, and obviously revitalizing the Democrat Party. I know, Lee, we talked about that. Republicans were a little lonely for their for the Democrat opposition for a while, huh?
Yeah, it's always nice to have a chair on the other side that you can communicate with. So, I'm Lee Hoffman, and my wife and I have been back to Elko since 1981. I worked for 32 years for Newmont Mining. I was 16 years on the Elko City Council. I've been chairman of the Elko Republican Party, I think, since 2012 or 13. And it's about time for some younger blood to take over.
Well, if that's an announcement, I guess we'll take it. But you're not going anywhere anytime soon, Lee.
No, I'm not.
Okay, that's excellent. And we could spend, if this was a different radio show, some time talking about the city's water modernization plan, because that's a long time coming. And when you were on the council, that was a big issue for you.
That always was a big issue, and I'm glad to see it happening.
So thank you, Lee. Well, let's not get too far off track. So on the sample ballot, you are going to find there are 6 questions in total. We're going to, in the interest of time, 7 questions. You're right. There are 7 questions. They are 1 through 7, and we are going to, in the interest of time, tackle primarily the ones that are generating the most conversation. And so we'll start with question 1. So what this one is back, but it's been modified. This proposes amendments to modify the authorities of the Board of Regents of the Nevada System of Higher Education. I didn't think about a way to formally start this. Is this something, Lance, do you want to start the conversation on,
Sure.
on question 1? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm a hard no on this question. I'm never one that wants to take, control from the people and votes from the people and put it into the hands of elected officials. The Board of Regents, are elected out of specific districts or regions, what have you. They're essentially a scholastic legislature. And so, again, I go back to the idea that, look at what has happened in Florida with, Ron DeSantis, and this isn't a partisan thing. It's just, he now gets to wield a lot of control over what happens in the education system, and I don't want our legislature to have that sort of control. I think that that's why we elect our Board of Regents. They're highly representative of the people, and I think that, I think that there's it provides, I think, for a lot more transparency and so on. So I'll get the conversation kicked off that way, and then I'll kick it over to Lee, and we can, talk back and forth.
All right, Lee.
Well, excuse me. First of all, you may find that there are a few things that we agree on. Excuse me.
I know, I didn't want, yes, there is one big question coming up, for our big conversation, yes.
And I agree with Lance on this. I am opposed to this legislation, or this constitutional amendment. And just to be really clear, right now the Board of Regents, the legislature is required to establish a procedure to elect the Board of Regents. And what this amendment would do is remove that constitutional protection so that the legislature could just essentially take over the operation of the Board of Regents. So I am always one who believes that keeping the voice of the people is very important, and that we should continue to elect our regents. Simple passage of this would not mean that we wouldn't elect them, but it would leave it up to the legislature as to whether that process would continue or not.
Right. Yes.
So that is question one. That is, shall the Nevada Constitution be amended to remove certain provisions governing the Board of Regents of the Nevada System of Higher Education and its administration of the state university and certain federal land grant funds, and to provide legislative oversight, additional legislative oversight of public institutions of higher education through regular independent audits without repealing the current statutory election process or other existing statutory provisions relating to the Board of Regents. So both of you are suggesting no on that.
Right. And I think it's also important to note on this one, Lori, that this same measure failed in 2020 after a $1 million ad campaign. And now it's back, on the ballot in 2024. They use the word auditing in there, for the legislature. Let's also keep in mind that the last audit took 3 years and cost over $700,000. So, it's important for the folks to know these things. This is a $2 billion annual budget that the Board of Regents controls, and to, essentially throw that into the hands of the legislature that only meets every other year, the assembly. That's quite a burden.
The one thing that I might add too, just from a local perspective, is that we often hear that people in rural Nevada would like to have more local input or representation. The one thing that this initiative does not correct is the rural representation that was damaged by redistricting. Right. Because now we don't have a rural region right now. The region that we do have that represents this area is from Las Vegas, and she is vacating her position in the event of her successful campaign for a Senate seat in the Nevada. Yep. And so she is favored to win that seat, but we will have to, the governor will appoint someone to fill that seat. Whether or not that's a rural person, truly rural person, we'll have to see the politics. But that isn't repaired by this vote.
Well, hopefully it's John Patrick Rice.
Well, you never know. Yeah, I know he ran unsuccessfully for that seat. Yes. So if you are, anything else, Lee, on that one? I
was just going to say, there are some components of this that if they were standalone, it would be fine. Some of the language changes and so on. But when they're lumped together with taking that constitutional protection away from our ability to vote for the regents, I have to just oppose the whole thing.
Right.
Okay.
It's a very convoluted question. When I read it, I was like, I don't even know what this means. I really had to do a deep dive into it.
Yeah, and again, that's why the conversation's good that we're having. We'll go on to, now question 3 might take a bit more conversation. Well, why don't we just dive right into it, because we've got the time. So question 3 is the open primaries ranked choice question. Shall the Nevada Constitution be amended to allow all Nevada voters the right to participate in open primary elections to choose candidates for the general election, in which all voters may then rank the remaining candidates by preference? Now, this is specific, it says, for the offices of U.S. senators, U.S. representatives, the governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, the state treasurer, the state controller, attorney general, and state lawmakers. So since you went first, Lance, last time, How about Lee? Would you like to chime in on question 3?
Vote no on question 3. That's the simplest way I can put it. I can give a number of reasons. First of all, one of the one of the ways it is being sold is that nonpartisans in Nevada don't get to vote in our closed primary. And it's referred to as disenfranchising those voters. But that is a false statement, because all a person has to do to be able to help one of the parties choose their candidate is register as that party. The political parties are not part of government. They are private organizations. And in my view, they have the right to choose their candidate that they want to put forward. So I think the open primary part is a false lead. Even more damaging is the ranked choice voting, wherein 5 candidates who would come out of the primary, each voter would be asked to rank those 1 through 5. And if there is no clear winner the first time, it goes through a rather convoluted process where in the lowest place person are dropped from the race and have their votes reallocated to the top 4 until you get a winner. It has not worked well in places like Alaska. If people think right now that it takes too long to get the results, just wait till we have to go through a process where votes are reallocated, and you really don't end up with a better result, because you can often end up with a third place candidate being the winner. It's convoluted. I think it will increase distrust in the election process. And I guess the other thing is, in my mind, it wasn't initiated in Nevada. It's being pushed by big money from out of state. I'm just an absolute no on question 3.
Lee Hoffman, chair of the Elko County Republican Party. Lance Whitney, chair of the Elko County Democrat Party.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm in a bit of disagreement with Lee on this one. I'm actually a yes on this question, and that's there are a whole host of reasons. Number one, partisan elections, are I think people are getting tired of partisan elections, and I think enfranchising more and more folks, especially when over a third of individuals in the state of Nevada are not registered as either a Republican or Democrat. And I think allowing them to vote in an open primary and cast a ballot enfranchises those voters rather than disenfranchising them. And if you think about it, let's just talk nationwide. 41% of registered voters do not subscribe to either the Republican or Democratic Party, right? So, and then you've got roughly 31% registered Democrats and then 25% registered Republicans. So they are by far, those who do not subscribe to either of the partisan parties are they've got way bigger voter numbers. And in terms of ranked choice voting, we tried this in the state of Utah within the Democratic Party, and it worked incredibly well. And I know that the counting of the ballots is pretty convoluted and does take a little bit more time, but we were incredibly happy. We had a whole lot of infighting over there about going to ranked choice, but we decided to try it out, and we were very pleasantly surprised with the results.
Lance Whitney, who chairs the Democrat Party. Now, are you surprised, Lee? I'm surprised because I thought that Democrats and Republicans were lockstep on question 3.
It is my understanding that the Democrat Party of Nevada, more globally, and I know Lance is speaking from a personal perspective, is opposed to question 3. I know the Independent American Party is opposed to question 3. And one of the other arguments, so far as I'm concerned, against question 3 is some of those smaller parties can get to the general election essentially automatically. The Independent American Party, all they have to do is put their candidate forward and they will be on the general election ballot. It's entirely possible with the open primary that those other smaller parties could be shut out completely from reaching the general election.
Right. And let me be clear. I'm in favor of this, speaking from personal experience, but I'm also not passionate about this question. Like, I'm not going to go away crying if it does not pass, right? So if it fails, I'll be just fine.
All right. So just to clear it up for listeners, question 3 asks Nevadans to adopt the open primary ranked choice voting system. It is a citizen-driven proposed state constitutional amendment. Now, as Lee described, comes from out of state interest. It means it must be approved twice by voters in subsequent general elections. Nevadans did pass question 3 in 2022, but it was close. 53% in support and 47% opposed.
Yes, it was quite close, and we were surprised it passed the first time. Mm-hmm. In Elko County, it did not pass.
Right. That means you were doing your job, educating people, Lee. And as noted, it would apply to presidential races. It would not apply, It would not apply to presidential races, nor would it change down ballot races like school board, county commission, or city council. So those races that we talked about.
It's just the state constitutional offices.
Okay. So it is interesting. We'll see how it goes. It's not really important to belate what happens if it passes, because if it does, then we'll have lots of time to talk about that, because it will change. I've talked with our county clerk at length, Becky Plunkett, and it would entirely change the way that we count election results, for example, in Elko County. So,
may I make just
one
more quick comment? Mm-hmm. For those who believe we should go to paper ballots, if you can even imagine what that would be like if you had ranked choice voting.
We'd be counting votes for 6 months.
Right. And do you have, either of you, since it's a very important local topic, any opinions or anything to add to the hand count paper ballots? I think is it a plank in the local platform, Lee, for the Republicans?
It is a plank in the local platform for Republicans, yes. I personally don't think that is the best solution.
Lance, any comments on hand counting paper ballots?
Yeah, I don't think it's a good solution either.
Okay.
I think that voting machines are very protected and they work, and we know that there's a group of folks out there that say otherwise, but there's absolutely no proof to validate that opinion.
All right. And that might just be an issue for the county commission election going on. We've got 2 vying for a seat being vacated by Wildy Bruff. And
that's correct.
Yeah. One's a Democrat and one's a Republican. So, and we're going to be inviting them to come on this show too. I know it's...
Is that District 1 you're talking?
I believe that's Wildy's. Lee?
I think that's...
5?
Oh, I never remember.
I've got a ballot right in front of me. Wait a minute. We do. We have our ballots right in front of us. And see, it's good that we're having this conversation, because this is the kind of conversation you could be having in your home, around your dinner table. I don't know if your boss wants you to have it at work, but we are looking at the county commission office. Wait, where are you? Did I look over? I'm seeing everybody but...
1.
Thank you. It is 1.
Yeah.
Very good. Oh, there it is, right there.
Yeah.
Jay Dalton is the
Dalton,
Democrat.
yep.
Brian Gale is the Republican. Interesting. They're both ranchers. They're both from the same geographic area, because these are districts. So interesting. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how voters come down on that one. So.
I'm just going to say, go Jay.
All right. So let's, and in the interest of educating people listening, we do want to ask about question 5, because I think Lee has an important point on this one. Question 5 proposes the exemption of child and adult diapers from certain taxes. So why is this on the ballot, Lee?
Well, that's a really interesting question. One would say, why does this end up being on the ballot? The reason is that in 1955, by popular referendum, the sales and use tax for Nevada was enacted. It can only be, things like this about it can only be changed by another popular vote. The legislature can't simply go and change it. So I think it was the Senate proposed a resolution to get it on the ballot, and so now it has to go to a vote of the people in order to change that portion of the sales and use tax
To exempt that.
legislation.
Yeah, to exempt,
Yep.
to make that exemption. But I think we're all in agreement that we're definitely, for that exemption, because when we're
The
talking
diaper
about
tax.
diapers,
Yeah, every new parent out there is saying, please,
Yes.
please give us a break. And
They've got enough on their plates as it is.
It's for adult diapers as well. So just
Yes.
and there is a question though, and I think it'll have to be decided. Obviously, it does carve out a financial hole. So and it's not insignificant. So that'll be interesting to see if voters approve this. Where's the money going to come from, right? So
Yep.
so there are always consequences. Okay, so moving on from question 5, the diaper tax, to question 6. Now this one proposes to amend the Nevada Constitution to make abortion access an individual right. Is it your turn to go first, Lance? I think so. Lee's nodding vigorously. Yes.
I think so. Obviously, I'm in favor of this. I'm a pro-choice Democrat. And I'll kick it off by saying that, I believe that decisions about, when it comes to a woman's right to choose should be made between her and her physician, and that should be that. Now, obviously, I'm not pro-abortion, right? I don't want to see babies aborted, but we have to understand that sometimes it shouldn't be our decision, and it should be the decision between the individual carrying that child and their physician. So that's where I stand on that question.
All right, so that is state question number 6. And I will just insert here, it's part of the digest that's included in your sample ballot. And then Lee is going to talk about this issue. It is important to note that existing law states abortions are legal in Nevada and must occur within 24 weeks after the start of the pregnancy. An exception currently exists to allow an abortion after 24 weeks if a physician reasonably believes that an abortion is necessary to preserve the pregnant person's life or health. Existing law also requires abortions performed after the 24th week of pregnancy be performed in a hospital licensed by the state of Nevada. So what is different about this, if this were to be approved by voters, this ballot measure adds a new section to Article 1 of the Nevada Constitution. So that's just to make it clear. So Lee.
I'm opposed to question 6 because the current legislation, as you referred to, was voted on by the people of the state of Nevada. It's very similar to the tax on diapers. It can't be changed by the legislature. It can't be changed by the governor. It can't be changed by anybody except by a vote of the people. It is already, in my view, a fairly liberal policy, allowing abortion for any reason up to 6 months. And after 6 months, if the mother's life and health is in jeopardy, and it requires that be done in a hospital. And again, I see no reason to institutionalize this in the Constitution, since the current fairly liberal Nevada voted on approach to abortion can't be changed except by another vote of the people.
Okay, thank you, Lee. And just to make clear, too, I am just reading from the sample ballot. So it sounds as though your argument against question 6 is that it's redundant. Is that correct for me to assume? Or
Well, I think it makes it's even more liberal. It opens it up even further. And I think one of the things that's really missing from this is the parental consent. I think when it says it's a fundamental right of every individual, that takes the parents out of the equation. And again, I think that is too much for me. So I think that the existing legislation is pretty protective of women's rights. And again, it was what was chosen by the voters of Nevada. I see no reason to amend the Constitution in this way.
Lee Hoffman chairs the Republican Party. And I think, Lance, you wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, I would just say that I don't think it's more liberal than what we currently have. In fact, like one could argue that it might even be a little less liberal, just because right now you can have an abortion in the state of Nevada up to pretty much 6 months, right? 24 weeks. This changes the verbiage to say that abortions can happen until fetal viability, right? Which means, and they say, the point in pregnancy when, in the professional judgment of the patient's treating healthcare practitioner, there is a significant likelihood of the fetus's sustained survival outside the uterus without the application of extraordinary medical measures. Well, we all know that different fetuses grow at different rates. And so one could argue, well, that you could reach fetal viability at 4 months, right? So I think that this really does allow the doctors to say, hey, it's kind of putting it in the hands of the doctors to be the professionals on this one, rather than just a timeline.
Okay. All right. Those are the pros and cons from our local leaders on the issues in the Democrat Central Committee, of course, the Democrat Party in Elko County. That's Lance Whitney and Lee Hoffman, who chairs the Elko County Republican Party. So just in the interest of time, that's question 6. I think the only thing I would just encourage, all registered voters should have received your sample ballot in the mail. If you haven't received it, you've also got a mail-in ballot. Please contact the county clerk's office right away to check the status of your voter registration. But you can read through. There are very clear arguments, and they're written in plain speak. And I wanted to mention that these, Lee's kind of nodding, and it's very plain language. It sounds like two people talking, right? And some of the arguments for and against.
Well, some of them, and some of them also get kind of convoluted. You can go cross-eyed reading your sample ballot.
That's very true.
Well, yeah. This I was thinking of, and oh gosh, like I said, in the interest of time, but it's kind of conversational. The Secretary of State's office, they actually sent out a press release, and so they said their goal was to develop explanations most voters can read and understand easily without complicated legal wording. So that might be leaving room for discussion, which is kind of healthy. And the only thing I would add in closing is the argument against voting no, making it simple, is because question 6 is, quoting, dangerous. It lets people who aren't doctors do abortions. It is wrong. It allows abortions through all 9 months of pregnancy. It is harmful. It strips out rules that keep women safe. It's expensive. It may cause lawsuits and cost millions to fund abortions. And it's unwanted. It changes our current abortion laws, which are clear. So I think in present company, what was really addressed was the timeline that Lance spoke of, and then that it's unwanted because it changes the current abortion laws, which I think Lee, you expressed are very clear. So if that's a fair summary.
It's a fair summary.
Yes.
All right, gentlemen, we are moving on to question 7. Oh, yes, this is another interesting political conversation, but it's also one that voters, I think, have weighed in on, proposing to, or I'm sorry, not voters. Voters will weigh in on, but they have answered surveys saying, proposes to amend the Nevada Constitution to require voter ID. I think it's your turn to go first, Lee.
Sure. So I will say that I was our county party was part of collecting signatures locally to get this onto the ballot. I think that voter ID is very popular generally within the state of Nevada. I believe some 74% of people polled support the idea of voter ID. I think it will go a long way towards re-establishing trust in the election system. Whether there should be or not, there is an awful lot of distrust about the election process and the election system. And as one of the arguments says, you need an ID for almost everything else. It seems to me a simple requirement to have registered voters provide an ID to vote. This has to, because it is an initiative petition, it will have to pass this time and subsequently in 2 more years in order to become part of the Nevada Constitution.
Lee Hoffman and Lance Whitney.
Yeah, just like question 6, this one needs to be ratified in 2026. We're 2-2 now, Lee. I'm in agreement on this one as well. I think that it will really help with regaining trust in the electoral process. The process has worked very well for quite some time, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with somebody presenting their ID to say, I am who I am. And so I'm absolutely in favor, and for all of the points that Lee brought up. So yeah, we're in agreement on this one, Lee.
Well, there you go. So, as you said, 2 for 2. So, just again, in the interest of citing what's contained in your sample ballot, one of the arguments against passage is that the risk of question 7 does not ensure Nevadans have the kind of ID the law demands, IDs that cost money and take time to get. Voters living in rural or tribal communities would have to travel long distances to a DMV to receive an ID. It is citing a figure of 21% of voting age Americans that don't have a driver's license with their current name and address. So that again is, and there's some rebuttal there, but you can go back and forth. You can read all of this yourself. And hopefully this has made some of these questions a lot more interesting to voters, because we've had a problem, right, Lee and Lance, in the past, that people simply pass up, right? They don't vote at all on the questions, and that leaves a big hole, doesn't it?
That leaves a big hole, and we encourage people to not just vote the top of the ticket, to go all the way down. The local contests are important. They have a direct impact on people's lives, and the
Yes.
questions are important. And everybody needs to be as informed as they possibly can.
Thank you, Lee.
100%, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, voting is important, period, but the questions really have a direct impact on your day-to-day life. They really do. I think it's also important to note that in the language of this ballot question, it does not say you need a driver's license. It says photo identification. So I think that if this does pass, the legislature could probably say, look, if you're a student at a college and you have a college identification, that would suffice. You know, it doesn't say driver's license. So I think that it's important to note that.
Okay, that is a good point. And then again, just for anybody wondering, we went through, there are 7 ballot questions. We went through 1, 3, we mentioned 5, we went through 6 and 7, just because we do have, checking the time, okay, we'll go over a little bit. But question 2, we would hope it was obvious. It's to revise certain terms within the Nevada Constitution. This does require a constitutional change, but it updates terminology for people with disabilities. I think that might be a fair assessment. Lee, is that something, even though it changes the Nevada Constitution, are there times when we should change the Constitution?
This seems to me to be a trivial exercise. I'm not opposed to it, but it's not a big deal.
Okay, and then Lance, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about 2.
I'm in agreement with Lee. You know, I'm actually I lean a little more in favor of it, because when you say like insane, right, that automatically you think like Jeffrey Dahmer or something. Well, but people with mental illnesses that still need the state's help, mental illness could be something as small as severe anxiety or debilitating anxiety, right? And so those people may need access to public health systems in the state. So, so I'm more in favor of changing the language, but it's one of those things that I think, again, I don't think it's absolutely necessary.
So that fits right into number 4, which again we didn't talk about, which might seem obvious on the surface, but if you're having this kind of conversation, I'll start with you. Question 4 proposes removing language authorizing the use of slavery and involuntary servitude as criminal punishment. Again, opening up and extracting from the Nevada Constitution.
So this one I find a little bit tricky, and I lean no on this. And the reason is because the involuntary servitude portion. I am all about removing the language slavery, absolutely. But let's not forget that involuntary servitude, if you are convicted of a crime and the judge sentences you to go out and pick up trash on the side of the road, that's essentially involuntary servitude. I'm absolutely, completely in agreement of removing slavery. I think it connotates, you think, lashings and so on, and given our history, right, and the history of the world, yeah, slavery is bad. It's not a good word. We don't like it. But involuntary servitude is a way of, I mean, that's what punishment is. If you go to prison, you're going to be put on laundry detail. That's involuntary servitude. So I think if a judge is able to use that language, it makes sense. So Lee's making a face over here. So
Well, I'm not making a face. I'm smiling.
Oh.
That gives us 3.
oh, good. Okay. Good.
For really exactly the same reason.
Fantastic.
Again, I don't see why the word slavery needs to be there, but they've gone beyond taking out slavery, and it leaves very much open to interpretation whether a judge can assign community service.
Exactly.
Or prisoners in the prison can be detailed to do the laundry.
Exactly.
It leaves a bunch of those questions unanswered. So for the same reason, I am opposed.
That's how I feel about it. But if this question only said slavery, I'd be absolutely in favor of it.
How interesting. And I was just looking in my sample ballot to see if I could discover where it originated or what was the impetus for it. Do either of you gentlemen know?
I don't.
It came from Assembly Joint Resolution number 10 of the 81st legislative session.
Okay.
So it came from the Assembly.
Which
I
is,
don't remember who initiated it.
so probably initiated as a well-intended, but has an overreaching consequence from the way you described.
That's what I think, yes.
Okay.
It was well intended, of course, but if it just said slavery, I'd be absolutely in favor. I think Lee would too, but adding that additional verbiage of involuntary servitude makes it a little vague, and also, I think could have some consequences.
Yeah, so I'll just, again, citing the ballot, the sample ballot that everyone should have gotten in the mail, arguments for passage. It does say in our prison system, offenders have the opportunity to volunteer for work in prison, earning credit towards their sentences or wages that go toward, among other things, restitution, child support, and commissary. This change is not intended to impact those voluntary work programs. Removing language authorizing the use of slavery or involuntary servitude is, as punishment for crime, would get rid of hurtful and offensive language while allowing voluntary work programs to continue. But again, it's not conclusive. It says not intended.
Not intended, and it uses the word voluntary. Again, it could take out the ability for a judge to assign community service.
Interesting. Very
Yes,
interesting.
Exactly.
Well, I have certainly learned a lot today, gentlemen, and I hope our listeners have. I hope that this was my secret plan. I hope that it's the first of many programs, because you certainly both know a lot more than I know and that I could possibly convey alone to our listeners, and I appreciate you coming. Lance, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Lance
very much.
Whitney, yes, who is the chair of the Democrat Party in Elko County. Lee Hoffman, the same thing. I really appreciate your being here. I hope you could both come in more often.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Lori and Lance. I mean, we can make it the 3L show.
There you go. Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
So, again, the importance is let's have conversations. Let's return to having in-person conversations. Let's just have a talk about it. When none of us agreed on everything, anything. It doesn't matter what my opinion is anyway, but what we're doing is having conversations and showing people how we can have this conversation again.
Right.
And again, learn things from each other, right?
Getting back to civil discourse.
Yes.
So if I can just
I would love it.
Summarize one thing.
Thank you.
Questions 1 through 5 will become law if passed this time. Questions 6 and 7 will reappear on the ballot in 2 years if passed this time.
Correct.
So, and 6 of the 7 amend the Nevada Constitution, and people should always pay attention before just willy-nilly amending the Constitution.
Absolutely. Well said, Lee. Well said.
Thank you, gentlemen. Lee Hoffman, Lance Whitney, our guest today. I'm thinking the next time we have you back, we could do a little, what do they call that when they have the quarterback, the analysis of the game, and you guys come in and do an analysis of how the candidate forums went, right? Wouldn't that be interesting? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Kind of a deep dive, yeah.
Yeah, the Chamber of Commerce is going to have those candidate forums, by the way. On October 16th, there's a meet and greet at 5:30. These are for races for county commission, for city council. Oh, and I should be looking at my list. There are 3 of them. And it's going to be with the meet and greet at 5:30. The candidate forums are at 6. And these are for folks who are seeking the county commission race, the city council. They're not doing school board. They were going to, but then they couldn't get everyone to commit to kind of having the forums. So
Interesting.
yeah, so that's just going to appear on your ballot. And we will have, we've already talked about, I have to reach out to Brian Gale to see if he can come on to do a radio show just like this, sitting side by side with Jay Dalton. But there will be an opportunity for, so we've got city council, we have, not that seat, County Commission District 1. Rex and John are seeking seats unopposed. And, oh, I know what it is. It's the clerk, Becky Plunkett and Michael Hawkins of the Independent American Party. So those are the candidate forums the Chamber of Commerce Government Affairs is featuring on October 16th, Elko Convention Center, and you're invited to be there. So, yes, please.
I just realized that I should clarify a statement I made earlier.
Oh, please do.
If that's okay.
I would like you to leave comfortable, yes.
It goes back to your question about paper ballots. So there's nothing wrong with paper ballots. Paper ballots can be effective, but they probably will still have to be machine read. What I really think is not the right solution is hand counting paper ballots. I'm not opposed to paper ballots, and the current machines generate a paper ballot which can be reviewed and audited, which I have done. But hand counting, when we have the number of races we have in Elko County and the precincts and so on, will not work very well.
Thank you.
I agree with that statement. Yeah. I mean, some people like to vote a paper ballot, especially older folks. They do. I mean, they've been doing it for years. But they are machine read, and I'm in agreement. Hand counting can lead to a little bit of, funny business. Let's call it that. That'll
be another conversation for another day. We'll see where that goes. I think the election may either quiet some of that or it may inflame it. Who knows? Early voting opens on October 19th through November 1st, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. This is in-person voting, Saturdays from 10 to 2, Wednesdays, October 23rd and 30th, 9 to 5 at the Indian View Heights Indian Colony Gymnasium. So we'll be talking more about this as it draws near, but please do take that sample ballot, mark it up, talk to your family, talk to your friends, be an informed voter and participate. The polls open on Election Day, or you can certainly mail in your ballot. You should have received that. If you have any questions at all, please call the Secretary of State, call the County Clerk, Becky Plunkett, and her staff, or go on to the Nevada Secretary of State website, and you can get all the details there. Update your registration and everything. All right? Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us for
And thank
Elko
you, Lee.
Live. Oh, yeah. Very nice. Great to see both of you here side by side today.